Hi everyone and welcome again to my channel AI with Muzammil. Today in this video we're going to talk about how we can create and use functions in Python. So let's go right into it. Alright, so let's go right into it and let's activate our conda environment by saying conda activate my first env and the prompt should change. We can clear the screen CLS. Okay. And then we are going to work on create and use functions. And functions are basically a very important part of any programming languages, and they're used to simplify the code and simplify the programs and actually reuse certain blocks and certain parts of code. And they're also used to maintain and for an easier read of the code. So they're basically very important in that regard. And in Python, to create a function, what we do is we define a word, this keyword definition, def, and then we give a name to the function, whatever function that we are trying to create. So, for example, we are trying to create a function that would greet someone with their name. So we can call or we can name this function as greeting function. Okay. And then here in parentheses, in small brackets, what we can do is take an argument, okay? And this is something that we call from the main program. And then to end this function line, what we do is we put a semicolon, full colon here. And then in the next line, something we can do something like this. So for example, we can write a message, greeting message, and we can say something like this. So this is our function created, and that's about it. It's a very simplistic way to create a function. So you write this definition keyword and then give any name that you would want and take as many arguments as you want. And for example, when we try to call this function, what we can do is basically copy this function's name and give it any name that we would want. So for example, we would call it this name Sophia. Okay. And then we can see that when we try to run this function, uh, we can we can check over here that it prints this message, hello Sophia. And we can also then play around with like other things, make it more cleaner, uh, or like any kind of uh, variations or changes that we would want to do. Okay, so that's how you create a function. That's a very simplistic way of doing it. You can also, since we know that there is one argument or one parameter here, okay, so we would want to pass it on from this end, from when we are calling this function. But you can also define a default value. So for example, you can say that the default value is, let's say, Sarah. Okay. Now what it does, is that when you call this function, okay, here, and you give it a name, Sophia, so it would basically print that name, or it would take that argument. But when we don't want to give it any name, like when you want to leave it empty, and then you would want to call it, what it would does is that it would take the by default value, which is Sarah here. And we can see that if we don't have any default value and then we try to call it, we will have uh, an error which says that missing one required positional argument name. So we should assign at least anything to this function. So the ideal practice is to assign at least something like Sarah, or you can also assign it like empty or even something like none, so that it would not throw this error. That's like one way of using functions, and then there are like depending on different scenarios, how you want to call it. It depends on how you can use functions. So you can also one of the very classical way of using function is, let's say, taking two number and returning sum. So sum function. Okay, and what it does is that it basically takes num1 and num2. And what does is that print uh, the sum is the sum is num1 plus num2. Okay, and we are missing a column here. And what this function basically does is that it you can give it two numbers, let's say any two numbers, one and something like 546 or whatever. And what it does is that it basically sums up these two numbers. It can either print it, okay? So let's run this function. We need to make sure that we have saved this function. So let's run this function, and we can say that it say that the sum is 547. Okay, and it you can also, what you can do is, instead of like asking it to print it, you can also get the number from here. So what you can do is you can say that return this value, whatever the value is, and you can get the value here. You can store the value from returning from this function to this sum variable here. You can call it sum value. Okay, and then you can print this sum value here as well. Sum value. Oops. Okay, now it should work. Good. And then we can run it again, and we can see that it pretty much does the same thing, or exactly does the same thing. So what it does is that it basically takes on these two numbers and adds them, and then return this added value, and you can then print out here. So that's pretty much it about functions, and it's really a very simplistic explanation of how functions work. Then depending on different tasks, it grows more complex, these functions, and then you can use it as per your advantage. But the main idea behind this is to have a reusable block of code, so you do not have to redefine a certain part of the code again and again, and then you can use it very conveniently. So that's about it from this video, and I hope you have learned something, and I'll see you in the next video.